I'm Ellie Jeremiah, and I want to introduce a new ECFR project that looks at the role of non-state armed groups in the Middle East and North Africa region and Europe's positioning towards such groups. It proposes a new rethinking of governance models in this part of the world and outlines the case for why European governments should engage with non-state armed groups. The project, which is co-authored by multiple voices from the region and at ECFR's MENA program, looks at 7 groups across the region where Europe has key interests. These include Hamas in Palestine, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon. In Syria, we look at both the HTS and the Syrian Democratic Forces. In Iraq, we look at Kataib Hezbollah and affiliated groups. And finally, the Libyan Arab Armed Forces led by Khalifa Haftar. Now, all of these groups are different and have very local characteristics, but they do all increasingly aspire to govern by combining a mix of political and violent tactics. They also challenge and compete with central government structures, and they have a certain degree of a popular base that gives them legitimacy for their cause. European governments rightly oppose the ideological and political positioning of many of these groups, and they must continue to condemn the use of violence that is used by many of these organizations. But as we explain in the paper, there's really no going back to the centralized governance structures that prevailed prior to the Arab uprisings. And Europe will need to deal with the realities that these non-state armed groups are going to be around for some time. European policy must therefore adapt to these changing realities and engage with key non-state armed groups. Now, our paper looks at 4 key principles and applies them to these groups that we've outlined in the project. Firstly, that European governments should prioritize reform and good governance in their engagement with these countries. Secondly, that they should promote long-term and inclusive engagement with all stakeholders, both state and non-state actors. Thirdly, that they should apply sanctions, designations, and no-contact policies carefully because, as we see it, these have largely backfired on European interests and abilities to engage with all relevant actors on the ground. And finally, European governments must continue to push back and press regional players that are often backing these non-state armed groups towards an inclusive political process. Essentially, this project boils down to saying that Europe needs a more effective approach towards the realities on the ground, and that these non-state armed groups are going to be an enduring feature of the Middle East and North Africa for some time to come. So take a look at our website for the project and follow our Twitter page on @ECFR MENA.